Hello, everyone. I'm connecting here on YouTube. Hola, Rodrigo, ¿cómo estás? So I'm going to start with 25 minutes of answers live on Instagram, and then I'll just switch here with patrons. So see you in a bit. I'm going to be here on Instagram for now. Hello, Katie. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. Gracias por llegar a este live Q&A. Hello, hello. People from all over the world joining. Right, so welcome to the monthly live Q&A. I do this kind of platform to just kind of exchange a little bit and try to answer questions that you may have around really anything. So, as you know, I'm a food educator. That's what I do professionally. I also do all kinds of things professionally, but I am passionate about many things, and you may have seen me on the final table, and you may have questions about that experience. And I'm super open. I want to share as much as I can. Hello, people joining from Turkey, Pittsburgh, and yeah. Hola a todos los que están en Latinoamérica, en Ecuador, en Colombia, Venezuela. Por ahí veo banderitas. Entonces, bienvenidos a todos. Entonces voy a empezar acá a contestar unas preguntas en Insta Live y luego me voy a ir a un cuarto de Zoom que tenemos, que va a ser con todos los patrons, para ir como más profundo. So, I'm going to answer the question in the language that it was asked, okay? So I might try to speak some Portuguese. I might speak some, well, English and Spanish. So let's start with these questions that you just asked on Instagram, and then we'll move to more deeper questions and kind of conversation on Patreon. Right, so let's see. I already answered 2 questions. If I had any favorite animals, and definitely my favorite animal is humans. I do think we're animals in the first place. I do think we emerge from nature, but I see animals as our cousins, not as some kind of separate entity from our evolution, right? If we evolved where we are, it is because of collaboration with other species, like chicken and cows and wolves that turned into dogs, right? So we are an emergence of nature. And so that's why if you were to ask me what my favorite animal is, it's definitely humans, because here we are. Linked to that, I already answered the question of if I have any pets. I showed a little video of the hens, and I guess pets serve a purpose. Any pet serves a purpose, right? Whether it is to have an emotional connection, to have company. But I feel that hens have something really special because you feed them and they give you something very tangible in exchange, which is eggs and food, right? So, and eventually with respect, at the end of the life of a hen, you can also sacrifice it and make a beautiful, healthy broth. So I think that's a very ancient connection that we have with certain animals that is beautiful. So I consider hens pets in a way. More questions. Okay, this one I get it a lot, so I have to answer it. How old am I? I'm 33. What else? Questions. Okay. Advice. So Chloe Helling asks advice for people just starting to go into conscious eating. So first of all, what is conscious eating, right? I don't have an answer. I have attempts at trying to understand it myself from my journey, from my perspective, but it's an ongoing conversation. It's not something that is already out there defined. Why? Because it's using a word that is conscious. What is consciousness? That's one of the greatest questions in science, one of the greatest questions in life. You know, along out there with the biggest questions, biggest metaphysical, philosophical questions that we can ask, like what is life? Why are we here on this planet? Are we alone in the universe? What is consciousness, right? That's one of the big questions. So by definition, or by lack of definition, because we haven't figured out what consciousness is, it's an ongoing conversation. And it's, you know, it's connected with very deep philosophy that we'll not go into right now, but conscious eating by definition, at least by the one that I see in my personal life, is a journey into trying to be more ethical in our decision-making around food. Trying to be more aware and knowledgeable about what we put in our bodies every day and the relationship that that food and that act of eating has on life around us, whether it is humans and social systems, whether it is the economy and food systems, whether it is ecosystems, right? And the nature where these ingredients come from. So I guess conscious eating is a very broad umbrella to ethical eating, and I would say to ethical living. The greatest philosophers in ancient Greece always put, and even philosophers today, put the question of how to live a good life, right? First and foremost, kind of what is the good life? And I think conscious eating, especially nowadays, especially in this century, is becoming one of the greatest issues. And at least that is what I've managed to experience, not only by passion, not only because I'm passionate about food and my professional career, but because we are facing massive challenges when it comes to our food systems, when it comes to environmental degradation and the 6th mass extinction that we're entering, and climate crisis, and a health crisis right now happening all over the world that is maybe caused because of the way we eat, especially animals. So, like, not too short, not too long answer to your question, Chloe Helling, about kind of how to get into conscious eating. Well, I try to define what conscious eating is, how to get into it, questioning everything and looking beyond and looking deeper into what food we choose on a daily basis. And a good place to start is the work that we've done with my patrons in the past year. The guide to conscious eating, we developed all together a guide to conscious eating based in scientific evidence, based in philosophy, based in let's say a more kind of a thorough investigation of what conscious eating could be. And we developed a manifesto in 10 points. If you haven't read it yet, go have a look on my website. But wait for Earth Day next week. we'll be launching with my patrons the guide to conscious eating translated into 20 languages. Thanks to many of you that maybe are even watching right now who volunteered their time to translate this. So we have 20 languages that are coming up with this guide to conscious eating, and it's a great starting point. The guide to conscious eating also is related to a Google Doc that has all the trusted sources that we used. So all the scientific reference, all the commentary, opinion pieces, news around conscious eating that in a way validate the guide. Right. Another question. Let's see. Bueno, hagamos una pregunta en español. Alejandro Reyes, Alejandro Seyer pregunta, ¿el futuro es dejar el consumo de carne? Yo diría que no. El futuro no es dejar de consumir carne, pero definitivamente el futuro no puede ser como estamos consumiendo animales hoy. No cabe duda de que el modelo de hoy en día va a pasar a la historia como el modelo más desastroso, más, digamos que más poco ético de la historia de la humanidad. Lo que ha sucedido, digamos, desde la industrialización del sistema de alimentos desde el momento en que empezamos a criar alimentos de manera masiva industrial. Han habido, digamos, yo lo veo como violaciones a los derechos de la naturaleza, violaciones de los derechos de los animales, porque los animales tienen derechos, así todavía hoy no sean reconocidos, digamos, por ley internacional, pero los animales y la naturaleza deben tener derecho tanto como los humanos, porque nosotros estaremos encima de todo lo demás. No tiene ningún sentido, digamos, ver como que nosotros somos dueños de la naturaleza y podemos hacer lo que se nos dé la gana. Eso es totalmente nefasto. Entonces, ¿el futuro es dejar de comer carne? No creo, porque hemos evolucionado gracias al comer carne. No es lo que nos volvió humanos. Lo que nos volvió humanos fue cocinar, y hay una hipótesis muy interesante de Richard Brangham, un primatólogo de Harvard, que dice que lo que nos convirtió en seres humanos es el haber controlado el fuego y haber empezado a cocinar. No es haber empezado a comer carne. Entonces, no es esencial el comer carne para poder vivir, pero sí creo que hay unas sinergias, hay tradiciones, hay cosas muy bonitas que suceden en la relación entre los humanos y los animales. Por ejemplo, en India, la vaca es sagrada, y personalmente pienso que las vacas son sagradas. No se comen la vaca, pero sí consumen el ghee, ¿no? Y el ghee es un alimento importantísimo, ¿no? Que es la mantequilla clarificada, por decirlo así. Entonces, hay unas cosas, y esa mantequilla clarificada se utiliza para cocinar, pero también para hacer ofrendas, ¿no? Y para todo un trabajo espiritual. Entonces, yo creo que hay un tema muy bonito con la relación con los animales. No podemos seguir como estamos haciendo hoy en día. Eso sí, no cabe duda de que tienen que cambiar. Bueno, otra pregunta. Podríamos hablar de esto durante tiempos, pero digamos que pasemos a otra cosa. Ok. Camila Vargas me pregunta, ya que estamos en español, ¿montarías un restaurante en Colombia? No creo. Yo siento que admiro mucho el trabajo de los restaurantes, pero creo que hay mucho más que hacer, al menos en mi camino, ¿no? En mi camino personal. Creo que hay mucho más que hacer alrededor de la educación de los alimentos en esta vida. Y tener un restaurante es algo hermoso, pero personalmente he decidido por ahora no montar restaurante. Me interesa más educar, me interesa más trabajar, hacer activismo con alimentos. Creo que hay mucho más que eso. Obviamente cocinar muy seguido, pero no digamos que bajo la sombrilla del negocio del restaurante. Me gusta ir más allá. So let's go back to English. Right. What do you miss the most in life out of quarantine? Well, as you can see, I'm very lucky that with my father and my family, we've been working on having land and living sustainably. So I'm very lucky that many of the things that I know I would miss very, very much if I were in a city right now, I am grateful to have that here, which is greenery, birdsong, food every day from the garden, clean water and clean water systems, activity with the earth, right? And fresh air and all these things that I would miss enormously if I were to be in a city. So I'm grateful for that. But it's of course taken a lot of work from my father, working for years to be able to afford a place in the countryside and to call our own and to work and to plant trees and to plant fruit trees and all the rest. So it's been a lot of work. So I'm grateful for that. But what I miss right now in quarantine, I mean, everything's perfect, right? We have to go through this, and I think that missing is also in a way the incapacity to detach yourself from a need. And I feel that it is important to kind of look forward to getting some things back into life. And I'll talk about what I'm looking forward to get back into life after quarantine. But it is important also to just realize that wherever we are now is kind of our journey, and we need to deal with it, and we need to work with it, and we need to grow from it. And it's not easy sometimes. So I know, and I'm aware that I'm saying this from a very privileged position of being in nature. But I guess it's, you know, just a philosophical reflection on being isolated, or let's say quarantine. What I'm looking forward the most after quarantine is dancing with my friends, is hugging my friends, is feeling community, right? And there's something deeper about community. There's, of course, the family and people that I really care about, but there's the family that you choose, not the one that was imposed on you by birth. And the family that I choose, I miss them a lot, and I like being alone very much, but I miss sharing with these people, because it's kind of, you know, you could say a sangha, right? A spiritual community, a kind of a deeper layer of connection with people that are right now all over the world. And so I'm looking forward to being reunited. And I think it's going to be very special when we get our presence back with the people we love the most. So David Cast asks, which country do you consider to have the most interesting gastronomic culture, and why? A little reflection on your question, not the answer to your question, a reflection on your question. It's interesting that we tend to categorize humans and traditions and all over the planet based on nations, based on frontiers and kind of borders that were invented by humans, mostly in the past decade or century or two. Most of the borders as we know them today were invented recently, were pushed recently. They are imaginary lines that we've imposed on ourselves. So which country is not the way I would kind of formulate the question in order to feel comfortable answering it. I would say with which ecosystem, which region, which I think ecosystem is the word that I would kind of like reformulate your question, David. So which ecosystem do you consider to have the most interesting gastronomic culture, and why? Another thing, which is kind of this competition, we tend to always try to find like who's better, what's better, right? Who is winning in a way. I feel in that sense that we're still kind of just being born as a species in a system where we are able to understand the globality of and the diversity and the complexity of human culture. So we're just realizing like right now how diverse we are, how we're able to access information from the other side of the planet thanks to these devices and internet. This is only 30 years ago that we invented internet, more or less. So, so 30, 40 years. So I'm just kind of putting into perspective here that what we say kind of favorite is maybe just the one. I have my biases, right? But it's the one that I am most connected with, I guess, because of the places I've visited. And I haven't visited all over the world. So it's that whatever I say is not the best, is just the one I know best, I guess. But I would say that I find beauty in every single place that I have visited in the world. From eating these incredible bread, fermented bread with my hands, and chickpea from Ethiopian cuisine, to eating on the floor Yemeni cuisine in Dubai, to eating in the Middle East, right? And all the incredible hummuses and this, all the food that is in the Middle East, which is also very connected and close to more like Mediterranean, right? The Mediterranean ecosystem, which has very different ecosystems all over the Mediterranean Sea, but that I feel very connected with, and I find it one of the healthiest diets, right? Mediterranean. So anything that is kind of south of Europe and Greece and the Middle East and north of Africa, I feel it's kind of one and same identity, which is the identity of the sea, right? The identity of the Mediterranean Sea. And of course, I am Latin American, and I absolutely love and admire, and find there's so much that we still have to discover. And I think many of the foods that will be staples in the future are not yet discovered by everyone. And they are in the Amazon. They are in the South American continent. It's one of the most biodiverse places in the world. The combination of traditions, the combination of ecosystems that you find in South America is really unique. Colombia, so I'm from there, so there's my bias, right? But in Colombia, you find influence from the Caribbean, right? The Caribbean Sea. You find influence from the Pacific Ocean. You find influence from the Andes, right? The Andes, where many and kind of First Nations lived, and unfortunately were mostly kind of wiped out by the colonization, and we lost a lot of culture in the Andes, especially in Colombia. But there is incredible wisdom, incredible foods there, right? If you're eating potatoes anywhere around the world, if you're eating tomatoes, if you're eating corn, if you're eating cacao and chocolate, all these fruits and foods come from the South American continent. Their DNA, the original DNA, comes from the South American continent. And it is mostly basically to the connection with the Amazon, which is this incredible life matrix that just emerged in this part of the world. And so I am a big fan of the Amazonian ecosystem and everything that happens around it, because I feel that there's a lot there for humankind to find new medicines, to find new superfoods, to find new staples that are more sustainable than the staples that we have today that grow all over the world. So this is kind of a, I guess, one way of answering your question, David. Okay, one last one. Pedro from Brazil, I imagine. Você perguntou se eu acredito em algum Deus. É uma questão muito profunda. Agora, aqui, está chovendo. Tem água que está caindo do céu. Isso, para mim, é divino. É uma coisa incrível que eu posso pegar uma semilha, uma planta, e tem água que cai do céu. Isso, para mim, é divino. Então, se eu acredito num Deus, eu acho que não acredito num Deus convencional de uma pessoa, de um homem, não? Não, é uma coisa que tudo o universo, toda a Terra, tá? Tudo que é vivo é a manifestação, eu acho que é a manifestação de divindade em esse planeta, que é o nosso planeta, não? Então, essa é uma maneira de responder a sua pergunta, Pedro. All right, so here's, this is it for now here on the Insta Live. I'm going to switch to the Zoom where I'm going to be continuing this Q&A with my patrons. I see some of them are already connected here. Hello. If you're watching here on Instagram, just move to the link I just posted on Patreon earlier today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all your questions. See you around. All right. Hello, hello. Just taking this one out. How's everyone doing here? Carlos?
Hola, hola, ¿cómo estás?
¿Qué tal, qué tal?
¿Qué tal? This is Elise, and this is us having breakfast.
Hey, hello, hello. Where are you, in New York?
We're in New York City, yeah, we're in Manhattan, a little bit cooped up in the apartment, but it all shall pass.
Yeah, it will all pass. Well, it's good to see you. I saw that you joined a few days ago, so welcome here. I see there's Veronique as well, Isadora, Robert, Brenda, hola de nuevo, and Jasmine, and Megan. All right, we're gonna wait. We're gonna wait a few more minutes to see more people. But yeah, let's meet a little bit more. Veronique, where are you? Veronique, you speak in French, maybe? Hi. I can't hear you. If you so the way we operate here on this live is like anyone is free to unmute yourself and just ask questions here, and we can. The difference with the live that I do here is this is just one way, but here it's a two-way conversation, and where I'm just, you know, I guess answering questions if you have any, but we're just having a dialogue, a conversation. So welcome to unmute. It's also a way to connect. Where are you from, Véronique? Or where are you calling from?
Un petit peu au nord de Montréal, north of Montreal, in Canada.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Is it still cold right there right now?
It is. Like I was watching you, I'm like, oh my God, where is he in this? Where are you exactly?
In Bordeaux, in south of France.
Oh, so, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, spring started here.
We're wearing still winter coats in the morning, and then afternoon it's like our spring coats. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys have in Canada, it's such a wonderful place. You guys have such a relationship to cold, and then you have these three months of beautiful weather. It's like paradise, but then it's only 3-4 months.
It's funny too. Like I was reading like your list. I'm like, what is he talking about? Like fresh herbs. It's not even out yet, you know. that's the only like downfall. I lived in LA for a while too, so I love the weather there for that. So
yeah, it's amazing.
So thank you all for everything you do too. It's it's a present to the world.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for saying that. And you know, I was thinking earlier about that, and it's funny, and we talk about this with my dad often, which is that if you do what you love, you'll never feel like you're working, right? And there's this old adage, right? And do what you love, and you'll never have to work a day in your life. Hold on, it's raining, so let me put this here. Just a sec. But it's true. Like it's, you know, and whenever you feel like you found a place where you can do what you love and be able to live of it, is some kind of path, some kind of alignment there that is really interesting. Ikigai, maybe it's one way of putting it. Yeah.
You're following.
Anyways, so yeah, exactly. So does anyone have any questions that they've thought about asking, or otherwise I have
go because we're talking quickly, and then I'll leave the mic to others. As I was reading your description, you were talking about something Genovese, which was it? But it's funny because I just bought seeds to plant basilic Genovese, and I was like, is that because it's from Genova? What is the specific spécificalité en français de Genovese?
Yeah, absolutely. So, wow, there's a few things there to observe. One of them is basil is originally from India. It's not Mediterranean, right? It came as one of these, in the spice trade, it came from the East. Basil is a sacred plant in Hinduism, for instance, and it's been for thousands of years because of its aroma, right? And because of its uses, and probably from an evolutionary perspective, if something smells good, it means that there's something good for our bodies, right? There's all our senses evolved as a way to increase our chances of survival. So if anything is pleasurable, it is because it increases goodness for our bodies, right? If we feel pleasure eating, especially great food, it's because our senses are sharply evolved through millions of years to perceive that. So basil is sacred because it smells nice, because it's good for us, right? And you see this in ancient cultures all over the world, where some aromatic plants, some kind of power plants, they are aromatic, right? And so it comes from there. That's one thing that I want to say. Now, Genovese. Genova, the city in Liguria, in the south, well, kind of north of Italy, Mediterranean, the south of the north of Italy, is the place where the recipe that is most known of pesto comes from, right? Pesto, as we'll see tomorrow, is a technique, not a recipe. So we'll go deeper into that conversation tomorrow, because we will have time for that. But the point is that that I want to make in particular here is that we all know the basil with big leaves, right? Mm-hmm. The most common one. But in particular, Genovese pesto is made with a very with a variety of basil that has very tiny leaves. So that is why I think the seeds that you bought are kind of Genovese seeds.
I see.
The seed is probably originally from the Himalayas or India originally, right? But we now have this kind of occidentalized kind of approach, which is based on the way we kind of pesto became famous because of this recipe that was exported. The New York Times did an article in the 40s talking about this Genovese pesto, and then it became a thing in New York, and then it became a thing worldwide, right? So it's kind of so I guess that's part of the answer to your question, but we'll go through more tomorrow.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Je laisse le micro à quelqu'un.
Okay, merci Véronique. All right, anyone else wants to ask a question eventually?
Hi, Michelle. Charles, sorry. Just a very quick question regarding tomorrow as well. What would you recommend for the mise en place so that we are ready to go?
So I thought about it, and then I said, well, no mise en place but you feel free to prepare a few things. The only mise en place I would recommend is to have all your ingredients clean and your kitchen very tidy and organized, and have a little table bin, have your knives clean, have your cutting boards, have all the materials, everything clean and ready. I think that's going to be enough. Because I was thinking maybe we could cook the potatoes for the gnocchi before to make some time. But if you cook the potatoes before and they cool down, then it's very hard to make them a puree. You need to process them while they're hot, and then need to cool them down a little bit, but don't work it too much. Otherwise it becomes very tough to actually make soft gnocchi. So no potatoes before. And when it comes to the pestos, I guess we could peel the garlic, right? That could be one thing, but it's kind of quick to do. We could chop the garlic, but I want to show you a technique that is very simple, because one thing, it's very different result if you cut the garlic than if you squeeze it. You get a completely different thing, right? Because you break the texture of the garlic, right? So let's keep them whole, and we'll do tomorrow, and we'll talk about the difference between chopping and squeezing and blending, right? It's three different, and that changes the way garlic will react. The best is paste, which is what we're going to do tomorrow, fresh. And then, yeah, no more kind of mise en place, I think, for tomorrow. Just have your herbs clean, even with everything. Like, don't take the leaves off the stems, because we'll talk about how we tend to waste stems way too often. And most of the times we can include the stems in the process. And I guess what I will invite us tomorrow to think with this kind of resilience cooking is to see that way too often we tend to forget something or some things that our great-grandparents or our parents' great-grandparents would have found to be completely ridiculous. We tend to do a lot of waste and kind of separate things, right? Why would you throw away 20% of your harvest just because it is not the leaf, right? If the stem, depending on the species, the stem, you can put it in your mouth and chew it, and it's actually soft. And you can chop it, and it blends into the leaf. So why would you throw away 20% of your harvest? Something that 100 years ago would be like impossible, like you're stupid, right? But now kind of we tend to, because and especially chefs have played a role, unfortunately, in this, because we tend to refine and refine and refine, and then we're throwing all these things away that are absolute, because we live in abundance, and so kind of doesn't matter. We're just going to take the best part, right? Actually, there's an interesting thing here. I'm going kind of sideways, but in First Nations, Native Americans in North Dakota call the white man wachichu, which means those who only take the lard, the fat, right? So we tend, let's say kind of the modern civilization, and especially people living in cities, without talking about Western Eastern, we tend to just take what we need and forget about what we don't want, right? Which is why we're so wasteful in the first place. And we tend to only get the nicest leaves, and the other leaves we throw them away, right? So that's, I think, something very interesting to really see as an approach to ingredients. Right. Any more questions?
Hey, hi, Charles.
Hello, Brenda.
I saw that in the recipe we're gonna use a mortar. Well, if we have one, and I found one in my house, and it's like this. I don't know if because I read there were many other types, so I don't know which is the best, or if it depends from the technique you're gonna.
Yeah, thank you for asking about that. So that mortar is amazing, actually. I think it's a volcanic rock, right? It's a very thick rock, and you actually see in anthropological studies and kind of archaeological research, these big stones, flat stones, and these round stones, and we would kind of use this thing for a lot. It would be our grinder, right? In modern Mexico, we have that often. Yes, your Carlos is showing one, beautiful. That's an example of an ancient kind of mortar. It used to be like a big plate, maybe it could be like, and we would put vegetables and greens and roots and even rice in there, and kind of, we would do a lot of things through that. So the mortar is, I think, a beautiful thing. So I have a tiny one myself that is not as beautiful as yours. As long as we have something that is a stone that is able to grind is enough, because the result is completely different if you blend than if you do this work. And I think there's a certain type of alchemy that happens. Alchemy, I said, like, that we don't understand yet the physical and molecular kind of underpinnings, but when you do this movement and this squeezing, ingredients react in a different way. Maybe they start oxidizing more, and then they preserve better. Sometimes you lose color, right? It's not as bright green when it comes to fresh herbs, but it depends on if you put kind of some antioxidants ingredient like lemon juice or vinegar. But there is a certain feel and texture, right, that will come about if you do. Any technique is good, but you always get a different result, depending on how you grind. Right, Carlos, you ask something? I see that you raise your hand. Or
no, that was
from before.
that was before? Okay.
Hand raising
Okay.
or just talk.
Good. Anyone else wants to ask a question? I see some new people have arrived. Welcome. Katie.
Totally different channel. So you talk a lot about your successes, and we know a lot about your successes. I am curious about one failure, quote unquote, that you've had.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Thank you for that. Do I talk a lot about my successes? I don't know. It's I guess I'm excited to share things that are moving forward. But yeah, there are many.
Conceited way.
Yeah, you know. Yeah, definitely. But I have failed a while. I think my biggest failures have been related to breaking relationships, to losing friendship with people. And for instance, I'm thinking about this event that I hosted, kind of co-created, hosted, produced in Ecuador 2.5 years ago, or 3 years ago. And a lot of incredible things happened during that event. And it was, we collaborated with Rodrigo. It was just a few months after we did the final table, so we were kind of very close. But a lot of things happened, and it was an incredible event, and we did a bunch of really exciting experiences. But people that were coming had very high expectations, and so because we wanted to do well, there were a lot of emotions and a lot of conflict. I almost ended up losing my friendship with Rodrigo because of that. We managed after that to kind of come back to it, but for a few months it was kind of very painful. And not only with Rodrigo, with other friends who helped me create this that are very close to my heart. We ended up failing at sustaining the love bond and the friendship that we had. And I guess that's, I don't necessarily see it as failure though. I see it as very harsh learning. Because I don't know, this idea of success versus failure is a very kind of a polarized view on a life's journey. It's like talking about good and evil. It's like talking about left and right. It's like talking about Democrats and Republicans. They're talking about male versus female, right? Or feminine versus masculine. Like all these polarizations, often lack of perspective, or lack of depth, because it's simple, right? To categorize. Our brains like categorizing. Oh, you're good man, or you're bad man, right? This is my enemy and this is my friend. It's easy. And simple minds kind of work like that. I'm thinking about a certain president out there who's really kind of, either, it's white or black. It's not, there's no transition. And this is the truth and this is bad. This is kind of, and even the way he speaks is just, so, and I think that's very connected to simple, shallow spirits and minds. And the deeper you go, the more you realize that these polarizations are not really helpful even, right? So when we think about failure and success, so again, I would almost kind of reconsider or question your question in a way, because it is within the framework of failure and success, and not of the journey of growing and the journey of learning, right? Because it really feels, I could see myself as having failed in that experience. And I could have failed completely if I just turned the page and said, that was failure, that's done, next, right? And I would have lost my friendship with Rodrigo and my friendship with my friend Charlotte, and there's still things that we need to solve, but and hard conversations need to happen, but it was growth, it was learning, it was hard learning, it was difficult experience, difficult emotions to navigate, but right, it's just part of the journey, and it's beautiful and inherently beautiful. And same, I would say, with my partners, my love partners. I could say that we failed, but really I see that it was actually beautiful love stories, and right, and it's not failure, it's just we were meant to be together for a certain time, and now we continue, we moved on. Anyways, just I guess, I hope that answers part of your question, and kind of, yeah.
I had a feeling that you might go that direction, especially at the end. I didn't know what you were going to say. I appreciate you revealing that about Rodrigo, and but I had a feeling that you would go into some direction. That's why I did the quote unquote failure.
Yeah, good.
I also
Well, thank you. Love the question.
Failures are not necessarily failures. So
yeah. And you know what, like this space of the reason why we do a live Q&A that is only for patrons and only for kind of more public, well, I guess this one is being live streamed, so actually, but it's public, but the point is that I really enjoy getting into these conversations, because I think we can go deeper when there's an interaction, right? And yeah, I mean, there's nothing to hide, so happy to answer any type of question.
I also had a question that was not about anything of this. I just want to know how the process was before you got to this, the Finite Elbow episodes. Like, did Netflix contact you, or was there like a banner and then you subscribed, or how was you entering to this competition?
Yeah, so that was actually a very painful process. Like the casting lasted like 8 months. We just got an email, and Netflix basically wanted to do this big event, right? And so this big culinary competition never done before. And they contacted all the best food bloggers, the most influential food bloggers all over the world. And they asked them to help them find the best chefs that were not necessarily famous, that were kind of emerging, and but that were doing something really interesting. And so they reached out, and then just 8 months of back and forth emails, sending videos, it was really painful. And I think that really affected the quality of the contestants in a way, because I mean, contestants were all amazing, don't get me wrong, but a lot of people could not go to LA because they didn't have a visa to the US, right? So by definition, a lot of people who might have been incredibly good and might have even won were not able because of the barrier. So there's a lot of barriers, but the process was really amazing, and the show itself, like, I have nothing to say about it. It was really an incredible experience. But yeah, it was a very long process to be onboarded. Right. Any other question? We have a question here on the chat. Right, so I'm going to answer that one. Yesenia. Hola, Yesenia. Your question about tomorrow, is the pesto a result of aioli? Is that your question? Is it kind of similar to aioli? So basically, it's an interesting question actually, because aioli, it's a very famous kind of Mediterranean sauce, or kind of French, Spanish. There's different ways. It's Mediterranean. The aioli, the way the French people do is, the French tradition is, take a mayonnaise and you add garlic, right? That's not the traditional way of using aioli. So I really appreciate your question, Yesenia, because the original aioli is garlic crushed with maybe an egg and mounted with olive oil. Even sometimes it's just the garlic, tons of garlic with salt and olive oil, and you have an emulsion with that. And that is the way certain Spanish kind of traditions still today do the real aioli, is just garlic and oil. So the technique is really kind of like pestle and mortar type of thing. It's a very ancient technique. So there is a connection with pesto and aioli for sure. It depends on how we understand aioli. If it's kind of the modern way, the French way, or the more kind of ancient Mediterranean or even Roman technique, which we'll talk about that more tomorrow. Right, we have another question here from Vanessa. My question is, how do you think human consciousness will evolve after this crisis? Do you think more people will think about being self-sufficient or going back to a more sustainable way of living? Good question. I love how we're jumping from failure and success to aioli to mortar to it's good. And now this is a very powerful question. Thank you, Vanessa. So it's hard to give an opinion on these topics because everything is so uncertain, right? And especially when you say human consciousness, what does that mean in the first place, right? But let's say that we just kind of answer the question in the form of how are we collectively going to act after this crisis, after this big lesson that we're getting all together as a species, right? And I don't think there's a hope, of course, and I think many of us share that hope that things will be better. But there's also a risk. And I've had many conversations with friends who are systems thinkers, who are kind of activists, who are kind of doing work all over the world or in different ways, people from social gastronomy movement. And we see kind of things can either go incredibly well, and we actually start integrating back into life, applying new things, applying innovative ways of eventually reducing food waste, eventually doing better in terms of and how we relate to each other and relate to the ecosystems and relate to ourselves. And there's a big reset. That's positive. But there's also a very big risk that we actually reinforce what was wrong before. And I see that both forces are very strong, right? There's the old world that doesn't want to die, and there's the new world that really wants to emerge. And like it's really depending on how we show up after that, right? So the question of, do you think we're going to be going more into self-sufficiency and going back to more sustainable ways of living, well, I'm asking you the question, like, would you like to? Do you think now that maybe you are living this, that you may go that direction? Because if you do, then the world changes for you, right? And maybe if we all wanted to change the world for starting with ourselves, things will change eventually, right? But I guess it's kind of bringing it back to individual action, which I guess has an importance. But I do think that as we get back to it, and especially with everything that happened last year when it comes to civil disobedience and kind of all the actions around the climate crisis and all the actions around the youth movements, right? I think that training that happened, it was kind of, I see that these movements, these grassroots movements were training last year for what's coming up next, because we're still in the middle of a climate crisis, right? The air is kind of being cleaned for a few months, but that's not like the fossil fuel industries still want to continue serving that model. And if that it keeps on going and the interests of governments is still tied to fossil fuels, unfortunately, we will keep on living in the same model of untethered consumption and kind of heavy consumerism, which is what got us into trouble in the first place. So I guess to answer also, so that's one way of answering the question. The other way is also to just share that I've had conversation with friends that have told me, like, I now find it more important than ever. All my friends who are in cities, I find it more important than ever to find a piece of land and root, you know, and have a base where I can grow my own vegetables, where I can, you know, and so there's definitely, I think, a big movement there. For me, it has really reinforced my belief, being here, especially at my father's place, that I don't want to live in a city. And if I do, it's got to be a city that has a lot of nature and kind of is really going towards regeneration in a way, kind of actively working to having more agriculture inside of the city in a way. But I don't want to be disconnected from this. So I guess that's my personal perspective on it. Right. Where we have a couple, Vanessa, yes, I'm glad that you appreciate the answer. So we have another question here from Jasmine. You saw in my bio that I don't want to open a restaurant. Why? That's a big question. It comes often. You know, let me give you a metaphor. Let's say that your profession is to be a piano player. If you're a piano player, right, there's many things you can do. But let's say that thinking that if you're a chef, if you're trained in the culinary technique, that you must open a restaurant is like thinking that if you know how to play the piano, well, then you should always be at the opera playing the same songs, and only at the opera, right? You're only going to be playing piano there, right? That's your box, right? But no, you can play piano, you can create electronic music, you can be a rock star, you can play music for elderly in care homes and, you know, make people's lives sweeter thanks to your music. You can teach piano, you can do all these things, right? And it's almost like normal when we think of a higher art or a higher craft like piano playing, that there's all these ways that you can do music. Although we can talk about the complexities of being a musician, especially a pianist, because you can't carry your instrument on you. So it's quite complicated. I have lots of pianist friends. But let's say that we tend to think that knowing how to cook, the obvious thing is to be a chef in a restaurant. And I disagree with that very deeply, because I do think that the way we've approached food education, which is no education whatsoever until you're 18. And then when you're 18, maybe you can choose to be a professional cook, right? And you can go and do higher education studies on how to become a food technician. That's funded, that has a reason to be to feed cooks into the restaurant industry, which is part of a larger industry, which is the food industry. It's like saying, it's like, you know, it's like training little soldiers. You train little soldiers so the little soldiers can go and go to war and be in a kitchen, right? And work for the restaurant industry. And it is a very kind of under the capitalistic framework. No judgment on capitalism. I think there's great things about it, but under that framework of industrialization I actually talk about this quite in depth when it comes to in one of my courses in the classes that I give at the Institut Paul Bocuse, when we talk about the birth of the restaurant, which was intimately linked and happened at the same time as the birth of the steam engine and the beginning of industrialization. That's when the restaurant emerged, right? So we have schools nowadays that train little soldiers that go into kitchens, and then you get to the restaurant and it's not what they told you. It's not what you thought it was. It is very, very hard. It is the kitchen in the restaurant is one of the places where you have most violent workplaces. It is where you see most inequality and lack of diversity. It is the place where you see most of the kind of, let's say, patriarchal hierarchy structure, right? Because you have a boss, the chef. Chef means chief, which is why I don't like kind of necessarily being called a chef, because I'm not a chief. I'm Charles. I'm a cook. Yes, I'm a technician of food, right? That's where I started. But there's the chef, right? In the kitchens, in the hierarchy, chef, like the general. And then there's the sous chef. There's like the people who are kind of making sure that the orders of the chef are executed. And then there's all these little operators that do only one thing. The one that does the entries, the entrees, the one that does fish, the one that does meat. And this hierarchical structure that is still very much today at the basis of how we operate restaurants was invented and put into place by Auguste Escoffier, amongst others, at the time where industrialization was booming in London and Paris, especially London. And when industrialization was booming, and they basically copy pasted the military system into kitchens. And that's what happened. Now, I know I'm going kind of all the way to all these different things to ask you a question about why I don't want to open a restaurant. But the point is that I think, and I realized this after burning myself out for years in Michelin star restaurants, where I realized that the power of food, I realized that even though I had experienced one of the most sensible kitchens, one of the most beautiful kind of restaurants in the world, a woman chef, 55 years old back then, 3 Michelin stars, a traditional family in Northern Italy that had held, at that time, I had held 3 Michelin stars for 15 years, incredible family, incredible story. And I burned myself out. I had physical problems. Like I had heart problems, I had back problems. I was 23. I was 23 and I was like completely broken physically because I was working way too much and in an environment that was not conducive to happiness because of the hard work, at least not mine happiness. And so I decided then that the power of food was not only to be explored in restaurants. That's where I understood it. And that's where I decided not to work in restaurants anymore. I do consultancies for restaurants, but I don't want to own a restaurant. Partly also because I want to be free and travel and do other things that I think are very much important, like food education, like innovation on food, like activism with food. And when you're in a restaurant, you have to be there every day. You have to be attached to a stove. You have to be kind of, you become a little slave of your business, right? And that's beautiful, and it's one of the most honorable jobs, I think. But at least my personal choice is to do my work as someone who's passionate with food and who's a food technician, but in different realm. So I guess that's my long answer to your question. Oh, beautiful share, Veronique. Veronique says that she had the same realization about her career versus owning a yoga studio. and she went back to community yoga and because she felt that she was more of service doing that. And nothing wrong with the studios, just your experience, but same as myself. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Right. Okay, so the time is, we already kind of went past the time, but if anyone wants to ask a last question, feel free, and then we'll close it for today.
If I can, I just would like to know, how much influence did your parents have on the way you look at the world?
Lots. I mean, yeah, I would say that I'm very much, yeah, my two roots are my father, who was a gardener when he was 15, and then an adventurer for 30 years, and he was a professional cyclist and ended up in Colombia doing, and so like this adventurer spirit, but very connected to the earth, and then came back to the earth after 30 years of travel, and now hasn't moved from here in 12 years. Like, he hasn't taken a plane in 12 years or more. And so I think that's one inspiration. And then my mother, in the way she lives, she's very wise, and she's just, she kind of graduated from work at 45 or 40. Like, she stopped, she found a way to create a capital, and then she just lives a good life. And that's something that's very important to me, to just live a good life, because we only have one, and we need to be aware that if there's no security of being in an environment that is fulfilling, that is, that fulfills your soul, that fulfills your peace of mind, right? I think that you're missing out on a lot of things. So that's what my mother told me, and that's why I'm who I am. And then, of course, all the influences of the masters that I've come across in the craft of food, but also in other crafts, and the friendships have been incredibly important, which is what I'm going to be posting today about, and on Instagram actually, is about friends. It's about the people that you surround yourself with, right? And both my dad and mom have been very, very important in that, and I've been lucky. But I think that there's also deep trauma that had to be resolved on both sides. And I think that every single human has some kind of problem, sometimes more with the mother, sometimes more with the dad. But we all have a struggle to solve with our mother or our father. And at least in my personal journey, coming at peace with what I didn't like about them was actually coming at peace with that same thing that I was having inside of me. And that's, and that's, I think, one of the biggest learnings. I would almost see it as a rite of passage, right? As something that when you really kind of you kind of have an upgrade as a human when you're able to forgive your parents for what they didn't give you, or for what they gave you in excess, and you're able to have a peaceful relationship with them before or after they die, just having peace with that. And I think that's very important for us to be able to be free, which connects with philosophical questions of freedom. What is really being free? But I think that there's a very important aspect of freedom that comes with, just loving your parents and thanking them and being grateful, and with whatever bad or good is there. Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you so much for for the questions. I really appreciate every single one of them. And Feza says that, yeah, sending love. Thank you so much for that. Megan, you asked a last thing, and I want to answer it because it's such a fascinating topic. What are your thoughts on culinary cultural appropriation? When is it okay or not okay to use traditional techniques and ingredients from a culture not your own? Such a big question. Well, I guess we can connect it with the first question that I answered on the Insta Live, which was, why are we talking about countries and not ecosystems, right? Why are we not considering ourselves one species yet? And I understand that there's very big problems with cultural appropriation. And I think with food is the same as with any other type of cultural appropriation. It's not if we do it, because if we're all speaking English here, we're appropriating a culture that is maybe not ours, right? And so if we are utilizing a phone that was designed in California, it is culturally designed there, but we're using it, and it's such a deep part of. So when is it right, bad or good? I don't know. But when it comes to, there's definitely bad ways of using cultural appropriation, which is to not honor where things come from and not respect something that might be sacred for someone else, or that might be utterly important and untouchable for someone else. And we need to be very aware. And I think that in general, for cultural appropriation and with food, I think it's such a complicated topic, but I think that appropriation is another way of saying evolution. Now, honoring where things come from, going beyond, asking questions, questioning everything that we're told, is fundamental for that evolution to be a good one. So I think when it comes to food, again, I think that there's something universal that can maybe solve a little bit for this question of cultural appropriation, which is, where are you standing? Where are you standing on the planet? Like, what's your direct natural ecosystem? What's the land surrounding you? And if you use the ingredients that that land gives you, you can't be wrong, right? Because you are in tune, you are in harmony. How are you treating water wherever you are? How are you treating animals wherever you are? Are you respecting what someone else finds sacred next to you? And by sacred, I'm using the biggest word, right? But it can be something that, you know, a way of doing things that one thinks is the best. But my kind of a bit of subversive mind is like, well, some things need to be changed, right? Some things deserve a little different thing. But we need to remember where we come from, and we need to honor like ancient traditions for sure. But we need to reconnect with that, and then to be able to inform ourselves to make new things. And I saw a question about fusion, Maya, that you asked. Which I think it relates to this. What is fusion? Sometimes fusion rhymes with confusion. It's not, you know, it really doesn't bring an evolution, right? Everything is fusion, right? If you're, you know, in India, one of the most classic dishes is made with tomatoes. Tomatoes come from South America. Was it culturally appropriated, right? Maybe not. Is Italian pesto because it is from basil that is considered sacred in India? Is it culturally appropriated? When do we start forgetting, right? And it just kind of becomes part. In indigenous First Nations in North America say that it takes 7 generations to create a new kind of cycle, right? So maybe that's what it takes sometimes. Anyways, that's a long answer, but I guess I hope that it gives some perspective. So thank you so much, everyone, for showing up to this live. I'm also happy to always answer questions, especially these spaces. But if you have any personal question to ask me on DM through Patreon, I'll try to. I put a point of honor to answering Patreon DMs even faster than I do my emails, and of course faster than I do Insta DM. So it is I give priority to those. So feel free to ask questions. And there's another really cool space that we have on next Wednesday. So tomorrow is the live cooking class. I'm hoping to see many of you there. On Wednesday, we're doing this open space where there's no agenda. We talk just about whatever wants to be talked about. And last Wednesday we had the first one. It was really fun. So feel welcome to join next Wednesday, about the same time. And yeah, excited to continue. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your support. It really means a lot. And so thank you. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.